All right, guys. So this is one of my favorite constellations to talk about, the Argos Navis constellation. Technically, all itself is not a part of one of the 88 modern constellations. However, individual parts of it are, and we will get into that, right? So, with that being said, this is one of the breakdowns of the fixed stars, the constellations from an astrological perspective. As you can see, the Argos Navis constellation. These are the four, might be five, honestly. I gotta double check. But these are the subsections that it is. This is the great ship, the Argos Navis constellation. One of the fun facts I like to mention about it is that Argo or the Argos or are basically the equivalent of the homosexual Spartans back in the day, which were encouraged for, camaraderie and whatnot. And I basically say all that to say that this is a spicy influence, to say the least, and to add a little, flavor to its influence for those that are under the affects of ESG. But anyways, the breakdown of the Argos constellation is, as you can see right here, it spans about 120 degrees of the zodiac. Um, it's covering from pretty much Cancer to Scorpio in today's day and age. However, when it came out, it was most likely Aries because the fixed stars move 1 degree every 72 years. And if you do the math of when Ptolemy was around, it was basically 2 millennia ago. So it was all the way back in the Aries space when the sun rose in the springtime, essentially, or around that. So what we have going on here is essentially the mythology of the Argos Navis constellation is it was the ship built by some old dude named Argus for essentially Jason and the Argonauts to go retrieve the Golden Fleece or some mythical, situation that they had going on for some magical power, right? You know how the mythologies go. But essentially going on that heroic journey and what it symbolizes for most is it symbolizes an aspect of mentality. It symbolizes an aspect of, mythical focus. It symbolizes an aspect of you going on a spiritual destiny or some type of divine mission. And like I said, heroic journey, right? So when we, excuse me. So when we talk about the Argos Navis constellation, a lot of the things before we get into the breakdown of, all these different aspects and what we have going on and its unique nature is essentially it's based around the mentality, right? You were either gifted a strong mentality to go through something that was, heroic, a bit crazy, a bit chaotic, something along those lines, or you were gifted the ability to guide people, or you were gifted the ability to help build mentalities, right? So when we talk about some influence from the Argos Navis constellation, it is one of a couple of things. It's either you have a strong mentality, you're here to lead people with your strong mentality, or you are here to build people with your strong mentality. And you may be doing all of the above depending on either A, how many stars are in this space, or B, whatever you got going on, right? So when we talk about the strength of the Argus Navis constellation, how it spans between 15 degrees of Cancer and essentially like 18 degrees of Scorpio, there's a lot going on with that, right? So when it comes with that, and we kind of get into or segue into the breakdown a little bit, I personally view through doing a lot of readings on these stars and knowing a handful of people that kind of deal with this is that the people in the space of Cancer are more or less the I guess you could say they are the leaders in a sense where they kind of like create the vibe that like people follow. They don't necessarily always create the mentality, but they, unify. And the Scorpio side to be the people that are kind of like going on a heroic journey because they feel some type of way, right? And it's interesting because when we actually get into the fixed stars, you'll understand that a little bit deeper. And there's, some history to it with the stars I selected to discuss. Now, with that being said, the last people that are kind of in the middle, these sort of like Libra, Virgo, tail end of Leo side, those a lot of the time are people that are there that are sent to build the mentality. They're the ones that build your perspective. They're the ones that unify people and cultivate people in a sense of like a space of, like we're all working towards one mission. This is how your mind should be. This is how your mind should be experienced, right? So it's kind of like they're the one that aggregates the group the group that all brings everybody together under one unified mentality for the purpose of, you know, unification and working towards a goal, right? Because anyone who is angling the Argos Navis constellation in some way, shape, or form, more often than not, they kind of do all three. But when they do all three, or they do expand it in some type of way, they kind of have a concentration in one, right? And like I said, it's based on the actual house sign, or the, space that, people in Western astrology consider to be the signs, and the common misnomer that they think about the stars. It's a whole thing. That's when they essentially, like, you know, that's how you kind of identify the different aspects of it, right? So, like I said, Cancer to mid degrees of Leo, that's the people that are here around, building mentalities, or they're the ones that are not building mentalities. They're the ones that are, more often than not, they're the ones that are kind of leading and charging ahead, and people are following them on a unique mission. When we get to Leo through essentially part of Libra, those are the people that build mentalities through relationships and nitpickiness, and they lead a little bit, and there's a different concentration, sort of like cusp, depending on what you're doing. And then when we get to Scorpio, those are the ones that are on their mission, and they're gung-ho with it, right? So without further ado, let us get into the different subsections of the actual breakdown, right? So these are the stars we're going to be going through in the future. This is the mythology. Oh yeah, I created this whole web page that I'll link in the description for people that want to read up on it in more of a, I guess you could say, technical breakdown, right? So when we talk about the astrological meaning and the breakdown of like the Argo Navis constellation and the subsections, we get a lot of different things, right? So as you can see, I was talking about, like, spiritual divine leadership, prophetic missions, spiritual navigation, and one of the main things, which is a collective pilgrimage, which is kind of what I was talking about regarding the Virgo Libra side of people, right? So this is something that, like, people do, right? It's all about a journey and everything a journey takes. So this is leadership, building a mentality. And when we talk about, like worship or leadership, like, it's all ship based, right? And it essentially comes back from this energy being attracted to our, solar system. So with that being said, it's like your worship or your worship is essentially your mentality, right? This is why when worship is commonly seen in religions, because you can kind of see religions as a, like almost buying a mentality, right? You're buying a moral system, you're buying a philosophy to give you strength on your spiritual travels, right? It's helped to assist you, right? This is why a lot of people with certain alignments or certain belief systems gravitate towards religion, because they are understanding it and interpreting it in such a unique way that they need to, kind of like latch onto that, right? And I shouldn't necessarily say unique way, because it's not unique. They're basically like, it's the car salesman equivalent of buying like a mentality, right? Like everybody who's Christian is like, Ford F-150. Everybody who is into like Islam is a either, like, not to be mean, but a camel or a Ferrari, right? Just for Dubai jokes. But or I should say Abu Dhabi. But with that being said, it's like everybody is kind of aligned in a similar way. And however it uniquely aligns with them is their own business, right? But the point being is it all comes back to the concept of a ship, right? You are building a mental vessel. And if we understand the elements from an energetic standpoint, like a lot of what we're flowing through in terms of the world is a lot of water, right? So it's a lot of emotion, it's a lot of experience, a lot of feelings, like pulling you in certain different ways. And you need a strong mentality to be able to ride through it, which is essentially the collective origins of this ship and its energetic influence, right? Like, these are the things you need to sustain yourself on your journey, which is why a lot of its influences come back to the concept of strength in mind, spiritual fortitude, you not drowning at sea and having a prosperous voyage, which is you being able to not be overwhelmed by having a certain moral system and internal boundaries, for you to not dive in so deep with your spirit in certain experiences that you don't want to, right? So it'll help you sustain yourself on your trip. And that's essentially what it is, right? Now, when it comes back to this specific influence, we're talking about, emotional depth, water symbolism. It is a ship, right? It's all about different aspects of the like emotional plane, right? And as you can see what I wrote right here, subconscious emotional exploration. The reason why these people are so good at mentalities, leadership, and just charging ahead with whatever thing they feel divinely called towards is that aspect of they have had like a dark night of the soul where they go through something or some situation of where they had to go through some spiritual purification, or maybe their ancestors were like, hey bruh, like deal with this, cleanse our bloodline from an auric standpoint. And essentially they had to deal with something that was very hard, and they had to essentially surrender to some sense of divine timing to put themselves in a space of where they were capable to be the leader of what's going on, right? They were capable to build the mentality that they needed. They were capable to go through some type of lesson to understand what it means to build a mentality and experience these things, right? So if we were to break it down towards bullet points, these people experience a strong, calling towards a spiritual service or global mission. They feel a lot of like, empathy and psychic perception, which is the, I guess you could say some of the tools they learn from that like deep experience of understanding what it means to build a mentality, right? And naturally, they're going to need to go around the world. They're going to need to go do these things. They're going to need to go through these experiences. And as I mentioned before, from more of an ancestral standpoint, these people are going to go through a lot of emotional and karmic cycles connected with water and memory of like some experience that built them, right? And it's going to be a very like demarcating experience of like, this is what I went through. This is what I experienced. This is what's going on. But yeah, like I said, it's kind of specific based off the breakdown of different actual aspects of the ship. So like I said in the beginning, the Argo Navis constellation was essentially one of the past like 48 constellations identified by Ptolemy. And since we entered into the modern 88 constellations with different technologies, so on and so forth, some of these constellations are divvied up in a way. So you'll probably see me doing other videos on these aspects specifically. But before we get that and we verify all them things, let's break it down from a standpoint of just talking about it right now, right, and identifying the different aspects of what people are experiencing. So when we talk about Carina, Carina is essentially, I'll show you right here. So Carina is essentially this like centerpiece of the boat. So it's like just essentially it's most of the body, right? This picture doesn't actually identify, but technically Pyxis is the compass, and it's actually up here on more, traditional breakdowns of it, right? I have it in my notes, or actually I didn't draw it, but basically it is the compass that is guiding it, and in the actual constellation, you have the Canis Major constellation right here, and technically this star would be Aludra, which is the tail of the Canis Major constellation. But check the playlist to see that actual video whenever that comes out, right? So with that being said, Carina is an interesting one because it is more of like, it has a lot of the essential spaces, like it's basically Cancer through Virgo, just because it's so vast and it's basically like all this space. But before we get too specific into that, Carina, it is kind of that like leader slash mentality builder that I was talking about before. It represents, foundational spiritual strength, core identity, which is essentially that mentality builder that I was talking about, of where they know who they are, they know what they want, and they know how to lead, right? And then it also, back to the leadership role, it has the star Canopus, which is the first fixed star that we will be talking about in regards to the actual fixed stars and what they mean. Now, moving on to the Puppis aspect of it, or the stern, which is this part right here. It is essentially a very leader. I mean, it's pretty simple, right? It's the front of the ship. It's the one that's like go and heave ho. And I don't know if you remember back with those like kind of like rowing ships that had the little spike underneath. So when they were battling at war, they would basically like pierce the hull of the ship. But that is essentially the Puppis area, where it symbolizes a lot of the difficulties of leadership, essentially. Where, as you can see here, it's like what we leave behind. And when we think about what we leave behind by chasing, something forward, it is that cusp of the spiritual birth as well as the winter. So it's that experience of, say, like all those like mythological movies where you had to essentially like leave your family because your entire village got raided, right? And now you have to go on some entire mythical journey to gain a super weapon and essentially go after something, right? So people that angle a lot of these stars are usually sent on some divine mission after a very deep spiritual loss, right? So you can look at it like, hey, this is what we got going on, but really? Do I have to go through all that to get it? Like that's kind of what the vibe is, right? So all the people that are from that space of the constellation is essentially, they have a very difficult time where they need to gain a lot of strength to build their mentality and leadership. So it's anchored in a lot of legacy, a lot of spiritual memory, a lot of ancestral stories, and it kind of brings up the concept of when people incarnate in this world, they are in a space of not necessarily like, it's not like free will doesn't exist, but it kind of aligns with the philosophy and perspective that you didn't incarnate to make decisions. You incarnated to understand why you made these decisions to begin with, because you already signed that contract before you incarnated as a spirit, right? Now, when we move on to the Vela constellation, or the sail, as you can see, the sail is where stars like Markeb are. Markeb is like specifically right here. It's one of the stars we're talking about. But essentially the sail, it's all about governing movement. It's about representing intuitive navigation, future visions, and divine wind, right? So this is where we come into the leadership aspect of the Argos Navis constellation, which is who puts the wind in your sails, right? Like who gives you the idea, who gives you the experience, who gives you the perspective on, or not the perspective, but the motivation along with the perspective to do certain things, right? So this is essentially like a very leadership based role. This is kind of that like, yeah, I think it's like, I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's like the Virgo Leo side of the constellation. It's probably a span since it's so big. But essentially it is that mentality builder as well as leader that positions people to be in a space of abundance, prosperity, and understanding, as well as motivation to actually just dive in and really experience these things. Now, when we move on to the Pyxis constellation, or the Pyxis aspect of the Argos Navis constellation, it is essentially the compass, right? So it is the leader, it is the guiding person, it's the oracle in the actual whole, vibe of what's going on, right? So yeah, it's a little bit less emphasized in astrology. However, it is, still important, right? It's kind of like, it's only a couple stars, so it's kind of like roped in with other constellations, but it's the compass of a major vessel with deep mythological influence, so it's kind of important, right? Essentially offers a lot of like directional insight and guidance. And what I have noticed about doing readings with a lot of people with the Pyxis constellation is they are very, very tied into their ancestors and or their spirit guides, and they don't exactly, not know what's going on no matter what the situation that they're in, right? But there's not really too much to it other than that. Like they're just very like oracle based, and they're deeply connected with people in the spirit world. And whatever that means to you is deeply based on your bloodline and your spirit buddies. So it's kind of like you just got to meditate and figure that one out on your own, right? We'll cover this. We'll do this as a kind of a what's the word? We'll do this as sort of like a segue into the fixed stars, but we're gonna cover this later. And then you can read this on your own. But yeah. So the one thing I wanted to look up was something along the lines of this. I wanted to have specific dates because there was I think it was like the full moon in Libra either a year or two ago in like 2023 or 2024, but pretty sure it was 23. But basically, the full moon aligned with some type of star in the Argos Navis constellation, and it was like a direct alignment. And something that like really made the news was it was like a ship crashing into some bridge in Baltimore. So that was like one of the big memories of that. I'm actually filming this right now on the Capricorn full moon in 2025, which is interesting. But anyways, some broad oversights before we get into the fixed stars is, um, you know, it's a constellation. It has a lot of different alignments to it. The element dominance is water. It has two water signs on encapsulating it on the right side during this period. It most likely will not by the time we reach the year. What would it be? It would be like 3,200 or 3,300. That's when it'll be fully out of water signs, or not fully out of water signs. It'll have Scorpio obviously still, but that's when it will be in the. Actually, no, it won't be that. It'll be yeah, it'll be the year like 3,000 when it finally exits Cancer and is fully in like Leo through Sagittarius, which will be interesting. Um, but yeah, it's all about collective journey, divine mission, prophetic navigation, and one of my most main things that I always find with Argos Navis constellation is a developmental cycle through the ego in some way, shape, or form, which is essentially what I talked about when it comes to mentality building, as well as being a leader based off of what you went through regarding your mentality or something along those lines. But yeah. Yeah. Now let's get on to the stars. Okay, let's get started with Canopus. So Canopus is it's the first star in the Argos Navis constellation in terms of degree spanning. It is specifically on the ship. It's like pretty much right here where kind of like this is called the keel of the ship. But it's basically like where the keel meets up with the stern, but it's like right about here, right? I actually have an interesting moment with this star when I was on vacation in Mexico one time, where it was one of the brightest stars, and it was actually like twinkling, like red and green, almost like it was a plane passing through. But it was in the constellation and it wasn't moving, and I watched it for like an hour straight, and it was just in the same space. So it was definitely Canopus, but it was like a weird like light thing where it was literally twinkling red and green. So it's like whoever if you want to like look at it from the perspective of the firmament or stars are really satellites, blah 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 blah, like that's a pretty strong argument for it based off of empirical evidence. But regardless, Canopus is at essentially at this time in 2025. Remember, fixed stars move 1 degree every 72 years, so whatever you find listed on the website is going to be a little different because they're usually based on the year 2000, 2050, or 1900. So Canopus is at 15 degrees and 20 minutes of Cancer right now. As you can see, it's all about the quote of possession of him who cometh. So it's kind of like one of those vibes of, hey man, like seize the day, it's yours. Like life isn't happening to you, it's happening for you, and it's giving you an opportunity to learn and grow, which is something that people find a lot more positivity and confidence in when they are on the up and up rather than being deep in it. You know what I'm saying? So it's an opportunity for people to really experience divine guidance, leadership, and prophetic insight. So if we move up a little bit, I actually have to flip these for the future because they're different in degrees, but we'll touch on that later. But if you look at where it is, dude, like if you think about a ship moving, where Canopus is literally on the cusp or like right below the surface of where the water crosses based off the ship's buoyancy, you know? So it is that feeling of like you being in the waters that you are trying to travel through. It's giving you an opportunity for you to open up, expand, and really just experience all the emotion, if not create the opportunity or the wave that people are riding in on for you to experience these things of just pure leadership, pure guidance, pure expansion, pure just like openness to the opportunity of what you want to be and how you want life to go, right? So Canopus is a powerful star. It's very bright. It's one of the brightest ones in the Argos Navis constellation. It is the first, right? It's mid degrees Cancer. So when you think about the opportunity of you being in like, an open space, or just being in a, perspective of optimism, as well as like, just even though like you're in the shits, for lack of a better term, you have the opportunity to create the vibe. So when it comes to Canopus, it's a very emotional star. It's very like, once you can finally accept that what you're going through um, is designed to shape your ego, your mentality, and your perspective. That's when you can truly take control of what this star's influence means to you. Now, when we move on, we're not actually doing Naos, we're doing Tureis, which is actually, I think it's a really cool star. I was surprised. I really got to flip flop these when I get done. But Tureis is at 11 degrees and 44 minutes of Leo at this current time. It's actually in a very interesting space of the ship when I looked it up. It's actually right here on the literal tip of the ship, right? So as you can see, when it literally says like a star of sacred possession, inner treasure, and protection, like when it comes to divine leadership and divine guidance, like downloads are hitting any people that angle Tureis with a strong alignment like nobody can possibly imagine, right? Like divine downloads, divine guidance, divine information, internal data sets. Like Tureis is a very powerful star with that, because it gives you the opportunity of like that person that is truly just um so deeply like aligned with what they want to do, and they're so sure, they're so confident in themselves that they just like naturally lead people. Like it's a very powerful star, and I would argue that during this day and age it's very powerful, even more so being that it's like anybody born between this time at like 11 degrees of Leo specifically, like if you're born in 2025 and you have an alignment with 11 degrees and 44 minutes of Leo, like that is the most like divine master number clarity angle of the star you could possibly have. Would be the craziest thing, because it means not only can you lead, not only can you go through like the gates of mental hell, but you can also purely channel an idea with the utmost abundance and adaptability to communicate this to anyone on whatever emotional level you're experiencing, right? So like if there's any like rally the troops star out there, it's this one, because they have that ability to see purely, see clearly, and just see so focused with what they want, and they can convince almost anyone to follow them in that, just off the strength of like what they went through, their story, and their pure aura on what it is to have. So yeah, Tureis is a powerful star, and it's interesting to say the least, right? Now we move on to Naos. Naos is a little bit different. It's not exactly in as cool of a space. However, it is useful nonetheless, right? So Naos, it symbolizes inner light and exalted spiritual force. Naos is like basically right here in the constellation. It is technically like a part of Puppis rather than Carina, but that's kind of like neither here nor there. But as you can see, it's essentially one of the guardrails on the ship. So while Naos isn't as exactly like wowzers, like inspirational as Tureis, it is powerful, right? It is useful. It is capable of doing XYZ. However, it is essentially like, it's not really a leader as much as it is a container, which is like personally like I see the benefit in that, because that's kind of how I lead as a person, of where it's like, it's like I'm not going to be your inspiration, I'm not going to be your deity, I'm not going to be like your be all end all like savior type of person. I am the person that is going to give you the tools to be your own leader, right? And this is kind of like a difficult position, right? Because most people are sheep and they just want to be led. But if we want a better world, self-reliance and responsibility is going to be something that kind of raises the bar, right? So it's sort of like, if you look at, there's like a certain level of like poverty in the world, spiritual and internal authority would kind of like solve a lot of that, because people are in a space of like their own, like if I can do it, I can get all the resources I need, I can do this, like You know, if people are more self-reliant, they can help themselves and have more space to help others, right? Blah 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 blah. It's a philosophy to think about, right? But essentially, people who are aligned with Naos, which sounds like the city in the middle of the Amazon, Manaus, um, they are really good at helping people identify that like moral aspect, which was what I kind of talked about with regards to religion and that sort of thing. So it's a space where people can kind of like open themselves up to the possibility of what could be, while kind of providing them with that internal rules, regulations, and sense of leadership that they may desire, if that makes any sense. So it's sort of like creating a container. I would say that people with this star, if they are men, they're very good with women because they naturally create a container for the feminine energy to have rules and regulations, which kind of gives them that opportunity to not just like be so chaotic and self-destruct in some way, shape, or form, right? Like, you know, it's not like they're pimping, but they're just by being naturally who they are, they're getting them to act right. You know, if they're women, they're very good at being in a space of just self-regulation, understanding how the world works, accepting of it, and not kind of being like a fart in the wind tantrum thrower. That like some other stars or influences may cater to. They're very focused. They're very driven. They're very lucky and sort of have that space of just like they kind of did these things before and they kind of just know how it goes. Like I wouldn't necessarily say it's old soul vibes, but I would say that they have some type of connection to the concept of just being capable, you know? And it kind of comes from the degree that it's at right now. Like 18 degrees breaks down to the number 9, and the number 9 in terms of like numerology is a very like it's the number of completion, right? So it's like they always have this energy, this aura, and this understanding of like they've done this before, right? So whether they have or they haven't, they always have tools and resources to call and draw upon to actually create a container for their own mentality and as well as likely others for a spiritual travel or some type of journey or experience, right? Now, moving on to the next star, which isn't the house system star. You'll see why I call it. I think that's the last one. Markeb. Okay. So Markeb, there's Markab, there's Merkab. It's a whole thing. If you've ever seen Evil, it's like that one cryptocurrency the demons were pumping, which was fucking hilarious. Yeah, that's a whole thing in itself. That's the capitalization of internet culture is funny. But Markeb is the bottom right part of the sail, like I mentioned right here earlier in the video, where Markeb is essentially it's like to ride or embark, like it's like essentially what it means. I forget what language, but it gives like this sense of spiritual propulsion on people's journeys, and kind of why that is just like it's almost like the compass aspect of where it's just like if you're following your intuition, you're following in the right journey, you're gonna have all your spirit homies alley-ooping you from the universe, just being like, yeah, man, this is it. You got this. You need me to airdrop a fucking like crate to actually support you in your mission. I got you. And it'll come in the form of probably like ideas, concepts, and solutions for you to actually just give people the ideas, right? So it's like that sort of like inspirational feeling of where you're just like, oh wow, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is what's going on. We have all these ideas to make this happen, and now we just gotta manifest it, you know? And it's kind of like that feeling of inspiration that carries you through your entire journey, right? Because it's just like most people experience inspiration. Oh, 1 second, right? Sorry. Markeb is in 29 degrees and 15 minutes of Virgo, right? So it's on like cusp of Libra. So we'll get into that in a second. But it's like most people experience inspiration at the beginning part of their journey where an idea sounds really cool, but people who have Markeb in a concentrated placement like Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, or a major planet like Jupiter, experience it on the entire follow through of their journey, right? So these are the people that if they follow their inspiration, it will guide them to exactly what they need to experience in terms of the, you know, expectations their ancestors or their spirit buddies have, right? So it's a good star, it's a powerful star, and it is deeply guiding because When you quote unquote feel the wind in your sails, that means you're on the right track of your journey. You're doing the right things. And anytime you stick with that feeling, you have an opportunity to expand. You have an opportunity to expose anything and everything that you could possibly want that is aligned with your journey. And it really is just that simple, right? So when we talk about it from the Virgo Libra cusp, or the cusp of beauty, during this day and age, and basically for the next, for like the previous couple hundred years to the future couple hundred years, this star at this space will offer people a deeper experience of what it means to kind of just like have a beautiful life, if as long as they follow their intuition and inspiration and position themselves in such a way that where they're like, yeah, I can do this, yeah, I can make this happen, yeah, blah, 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 you know. But basically it's like, follow your inspiration, follow that motivation, and it will lead you continuously through what you need to do and how you need to make it happen. Now, the final star, which is, it's like Misa, it's, Miaplacidus. So this is interesting because it is the same exact name of the common house systems, not the same exact name without the Mia, obviously, not Mia, just Placidus. The Placidus is some like 1700s astrologer / astronomer that was just like, yo guys, like, I don't think whole signs where it's at. I don't think equal houses is where it's at. I feel as though if we're at different parts of the equator, different parts of the sky will be expanded and contracted based off of our location, right? Let's add that in and see how that plays out, you know? So it's interesting that Miaplacidus, which is at 2 degrees and 20 minutes of Scorpio, is actually in, where is it? It is actually right here on the cusp of the keel and the rudder of the ship, right? So Miaplacidus is interesting because, as you can see, it symbolizes calm seas, serenity, and after tribulation, right? So as you can see, it's the rudder. So when we turn the wheel on the ship, we're like, stressful seas, let's get the fuck out of here, you know? Like, that is essentially what it is, right? So it's like, okay, we let ourselves into a predicament. What are we going to do to get out? I have the ability to sustain it. Yeah, that's cool. But just because I have the ability to sustain something doesn't necessarily mean that I want to do it. You know, it doesn't mean that I want to experience it. It doesn't mean that I want to be the person to go through this. I want to know what it's like so I know how to avoid it, but it doesn't mean that I necessarily want to go through this, right? So they have the ability to lead and charge ahead in some way, shape, or form that is beneficial for a arduous or an Argus journey for this purpose, but it's not necessarily like something that they want to do. They're built for it, they're capable of it, but it's on them to have the wisdom and to set the boundaries of what they want to experience, right? However, you need those experiences to know, because without that, like, you cannot lead. Without that, you cannot be a, divine intuitive person without just being like, oh, man, this is a tough one, man, let's get out of here, this is a tough one, you know what I'm saying? So with that being said, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Some of the connections I noticed is that it has the Placidus in it, so I assume it was that 17th century astrologer that basically created the house system that everybody in Western astrology uses nowadays, that kind of named it with the word Mia. That's an Italian name. I assumed he like named it after some girl that he was probably chasing after, and it didn't work out because he was chasing. And you know what they say, pick the one that likes you. So yeah, we'll see about that. I don't know. I'm actually gonna research that because it's very interesting to me, and I got to research that Placidus dude more because like homie's the foundation of like every modern person's take on astrology, at least in the West. So yeah, with that being said, the essential influence of Miaplacidus in most, like I said, all these, get a fixed star rating. If you actually want to know the specifics of this, because how I specifically do fixed star readings is I focus on your moon sign, because your moon is the only planet in astrology that can make decisions, right? It's the one that can react, respond, reflect, and it's also the pathway of how your soul incarnated on Earth. And there's a lot of different spiritual reasons for why you want to focus on the moon, because once you know that Western astrology isn't based in the stars, The moon reflects light, dog. Like, you want to pay attention to the light that it reflected, because that's how you're reflecting all of the light that is in this world, and that's the perspective that you're going with from. So, with that being said, it's the main decision maker. It's the key to your purpose. It's the key to your mentality. It's the key reason from your past lives and where you may have incarnated from. So, pay attention to your fixed star. And with that being said, if it is Miaplacidus, which specifically angles your moon at roughly 2 degrees of Scorpio, you are essentially a person that is capable of going through hardship and, cultivating your mind and moving it in a way that you want, but you're also the leader that has gone through the hardest places. And if you want to guide people under a certain mentality to a unique space that isn't exactly as painful as you've gone through, then you need to learn, right? You need to go through things. You need to be the leader, because you're the one that is subtly guiding everyone that follows you, whether they know it or not. So yeah, that's pretty much the Argos Navis constellation, guys. If you are interested, get a fixed star reading, and I'm gonna throw up the entire playlist of all the constellations as I record them over here. Peace.